August is here, and that means that the weather and the election cycle are heating up. The best way to beat the heat and stay up to date on the latest news from the US election to international breaking headlines is to become a DSR member and gain access to additional content across our network, in addition to other exclusive benefits. Use code BEATTHEHEAT to get 50% off of your membership and sign up today at thedsrnetwork.com/buy. That's Beat the Heat at thedsrnetwork.com/buy. Now please enjoy the show.
This is the Daily Blast from the New Republic, produced and presented by the DSR Network. I'm your host, Greg Sargent. Some of the biggest far-right figures on the internet are deeply worried that Donald Trump is in the process of losing the election to Kamala Harris. The Washington Post reports that these personalities are waging war on the Trump campaign, which could complicate efforts to keep the MAGA movement unified behind Trump in the race's final stretch. Intriguingly, this is deeply at odds with what some of Trump's more mainstream allies are saying, which is that the polls are wrong or even rigged, that Trump can't possibly be losing. We think this moment reveals something interesting about what happens to the MAGA right when it faces extreme pressure and copes with serious self-doubt. Today we're discussing this with Jared Holt, a senior researcher at the Institute for Strategic Dialogue who closely tracks the online far right and spends as much time as anyone alive making sense of MAGA. Good to have you on, Jared.
Hey, thanks for having me, Greg. And every time I hear, my job read back to me, I just think, what have I done these last 10 years?
Yeah, man, I will tell you, I do not envy you.
It certainly is a way to make a living.
Yeah, well, you probably earn every penny of it. Jared, the Post report is striking. Among the far-right figures who are turning on Trump are white supremacist Nick Fuentes, who says that Trump is, quote, blowing it and headed for a catastrophic loss. Far-right activist Laura Loomer says Trump's surrogates are weak and stalling his momentum and that something needs to change fast or he'll lose. And far-right influencer Candace Owens says that Trump is losing support from the people that believed in him. Where's this stuff coming from all of a sudden?
So I think it's important to note that these discontents with the Trump campaign are not necessarily new, but I do think they have been heightened since Kamala Harris was, put forward to be the assumed nominee and then later the confirmed nominee for the Democratic ticket this fall. I think what they are picking up on is something that a lot of people in media have picked up on, which is that the Trump campaign has seemed to be taking the strategy that they don't need to change anything, that they are going to keep the ship on the path and run the same campaign that they were going to run against Joe Biden anyway. I think what they are perceiving is kind of a momentum shift. They were running against a base of activists, your sort of rank and file Democrats that didn't seem to be that, excited about Biden. Maybe a lot of them supported him, but certainly, not the levels of excitement that has been seen on the campaign trail and online, since Harris came in. And they're a little bit worried. So a lot of this criticism has its roots in these maybe longer insecurities with the Trump campaign, but really kind of bubbled to the forefront as they have the perception that they're losing a bit of the upper hand.
That's a fascinating point you make there. I think what is scaring them is the energy on the Harris side, right? It's mirrored in Trump calling all her crowds fake, right? We've said this on here before, but the size of the Harris crowds, both figuratively and literally, scares the shit out of the right because they aren't supposed to be that big, right?
Right, yeah. And they seem to be almost unable to process that they are that big.
It's not just the actual crowds at a particular Harris rally, right? It's the depth and breadth of her support in the country. A black woman is not supposed to have this kind of support.
Yeah, I mean, they sense trouble. They are worried what will happen to them if Trump does not get reelected, I imagine, in a political sense, but also when we think of people like Nicholas Fuentes or Laura Loomer or Candace Owens, their careers are hitched to the Trump era. Without Trump, how do these people stay relevant? I mean, they are big enough now. It's like somebody like Alex Jones, even though he is, his star very much has faded. He got big enough first that he'll always have some kind of cult following, but this sort of position in the limelight where they're getting profiles in magazines and getting to go on the big talk radio shows that they like and are getting tons of engagement on all their content. I also wonder how much of it might be the sense that the gravy train could end if Trump doesn't pull it off.
That's just so fascinating. I mean, if I hear you correctly, I think what you're saying here is they fear that the sun will set on the Trump era. I want to come back to that. But first, a major contradiction has crept into the MAGA universe here. Even as all these top far-right influencer types admit Trump might lose, and lose badly in their own words, other MAGA figures are just denying that the polls can possibly be right. Here's Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance.
Consistently, what you've seen in 2016 and 2020 is that the media uses fake polls to drive down Republican turnout and to create dissension and conflict with Republican voters.
And Fox's Jesse Waters has been saying that the polls are badly skewed or rigged against Trump. Trump himself says he's leading in the real polls. Jared, what explains the schism here? Why are the extreme far-right influencers taking Harris's lead in the polls far more seriously than these more mainstream figures are?
What I think that split also illustrates that's really interesting at this moment is this dynamic where over the last 8 or 9 years, as Trump has kind of had this meteoric rise to take over the Republican Party and completely reshape it in his image, there is kind of a social condition on the political right now where there is not room for dissent against the king, for lack of a better words. Trump is the king of the GOP. He is the leader who cannot fail, that must be supported at all points. He cannot afford to be embarrassed. That's part of the Trump brand, is he's just this like headstrong, strong man thing. He can't be embarrassed. So to dissent against Trump is also, you're trying to get something like that to stick or to be taken seriously in an environment where the media consumers, the activist base, everything has been sort of, conditioned over time to exile dissent.
Well, I'd like to suggest one thing I think could be driving this split, which is a genuine difference in MAGA over their theories of this election. The extreme figures like Fuentes and so forth are saying that Trump is now losing because the pure, unalloyed, far-right MAGA message on race and immigration is being diluted by compromising strategists who want Trump to soften his image to swing voters. So to those far-right types, Trump is kind of this chosen figure who's revealing the true latent far-right extremism of the American people, revealing that public opinion is, in some sense, genuinely aligned with white supremacy, extreme white nationalism, and other far-right ideologies, and that's just getting buried by the compromisers. I mean, that's not something J.D. Vance or Trump campaign managers Chris LaCivita and Susie Wiles believe. So what is it about the extreme right that leads them to that place, this belief that there's this kind of latent and authentic white supremacy, white nationalism lurking just under the surface of the American people there?
I mean, I don't know that they're totally wrong about that. That there is just, this like latent strain of...
But they think it's majority opinion is my point, all right?
I mean, they think it's majority opinion, and probably the biggest difference between folks like you and me and them is that they think it's good, and they think there should be more of it, and that those tendencies should be catered to, which I don't think we think. But yeah, it's so I don't know that they're totally wrong, that there are those sort of undercurrents in American society, and there always have been. Politicians have been playing to them since the start of this country. But they, like you said, they do seem to be under the impression that these views are, that people are willing to support these views in more explicit terms, or willing to openly identify with those viewpoints.
If given the chance.
Which I think, if given the chance, if given a sense of social permission to do so.
Right.
I think what folks like, Chris and Susie over at the Trump campaign are betting is that is actually not true. When it comes to some of the more far out or extreme messaging, I think 2022 midterms was a pretty, if I'm a GOP strategist or consultant, I looked at midterms and I said that messaging doesn't really work when your margins are tight. It activates your base.
Yeah.
But if you are in a place like Pennsylvania and you actually need to move whatever small percentage of people needs to move because the margin is so tight, this is maybe not the best way to go about it. And, after the assassination attempt on Trump, it's like you have to try to, come across, and they try to do this pivot of the Democrats are the ones that are pretty far out. We're actually pretty normal here. Which is also why I think the weird messaging is bothering them so much.
So, Jared, who are Nick Fuentes and the Groypers? These influencers really represent millions and millions of Trump supporters, right? Who is this body of people? Who are the Groypers? Where do they all fit into the MAGA movement?
So, I don't know if I would give Nick so much credit to say he represents millions of people, but so Nicholas Fuentes is a young guy. I think he's 4 years younger than me. I think he's 26. He lives in the Chicago area. He does this live stream podcast thing every night called America First. He's been doing these kind of live stream podcasts since he was, since 2016, 2017. But he kind of rose up as almost like an ancillary figure in what people were calling the alt-right back then. And in the Trump era, managed to kind of get his footing. Eventually, he came to sort of a fork in the road between the more extreme, even more extreme than him, sort of white nationalists that were just diehard ideologues, and the ones that wanted to try to make some kind of pivot and play to capture what they perceive as that, maybe less ashamed racist element in Trump's base. So he makes this pivot out and just keeps doing this podcast over the years, and in the process manages to develop a pretty intense cult following. Nick is a lot better spoken than a lot of his peer podcasters in that circuit. He has, the unfortunate quality of being occasionally funny. I mean, a lot of these guys that believe this stuff, they get on the mic and they do good not to throw up on themselves by the end of the show.
And who are the Groypers?
That is what his superfans call themselves. You can find them online because they have names like Raptor, Cum, Groyper, and little avatars with frogs that they're like Pepe the Frog, but like too fat. Look,
they love the frog. And I asked, so the Post story had this interesting detail where Trump campaign officials say Nick Fuentes and the Groypers are becoming a serious distraction. When they attack the Trump campaign and demand a change of course, these sources told the Post, it actually makes it harder for them to get new blood into the campaign or change course because it looks like they're responding to the lunatic far right, and they don't want to look like that. So I want to ask you about this. The Trump team has to walk this careful balance, right? They need to appeal to millions and millions of people who genuinely are white supremacists or very serious white nationalists or in that, ideological ballpark, because those people are a genuine part of the Trump MAGA coalition, right? But they can't appear to be doing this. Isn't that the dynamic?
Yeah. When they said that to the Post, I think they kind of gave the game away a little bit there by one, acknowledging them, which if I was on the Trump campaign, I would ignore them completely as much as humanly possible, if I didn't want to be associated with them. But to, essentially cave to admitting that, we're aware of these people and we know what they're up to. I mean, what they said to the Post is essentially saying that they're like a little bit scared of them, right?
Yeah.
Which, even if they don't do what Fuentes and his followers have been calling on them to do, which is fire their campaign managers and change up their rhetoric,
go full racist.
That is like, a present to them. It's a gift to them. It's acknowledgement. It is treating them as a serious political constituency when really they're just a bunch of people that like to say the N-word on the internet.
But they are a serious constituency, is my point.
They're a serious constituency of deeply unserious people, if that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's another two-step going on here. Trump figures are publicly denouncing people like Nick Fuentes. J.D. Vance called him a loser, I believe, all to obscure the...
Yeah, accurate.
Yeah. Well, all to...
One of the few times I'll break bread with Vance there.
Well, yeah, he seemed genuinely pissed, and probably, because he understands what a big problem this is, right? He's trying to obscure the fact that Trump had dinner with Fuentes and that Trump does view these people as essential to the MAGA coalition, right? But at the same time, official party institutions are moving the window of discourse deep into serious white nationalist territory. The Trump campaign had that horrible tweet showing suburban neighborhoods overrun with dark hordes from the third world. That was the implication. And the Republican National Committee has an official website devoted to quote-unquote migrant crime, which is an invented category, smearing migrants as dangerous criminals. Can you talk about this two-step? I mean, it's dangerous, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it's just like, this is really, not even much of a skip, hop, jump away from the kind of, conspiracy theories that animate the brains of racist mass shooters. Hordes of immigrants coming into the country, plaguing white society, and somebody needs to do something. You can find that in manifestos. It's seemingly official Republican Party rhetoric. But yeah, you have this whole party sort of drifting further to the right, helmed by, their youth activist orgs like Turning Point USA. It seems to be that they are, generally, they're not like denouncing these people because they're terribly ideologically divorced from them, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I think a lot of it is the optics of it. And then I also think part of it too might just be that over the course of the years, Nick has gotten a lot of attention for himself by being a complete asshole to everybody else in conservative politics. And they might genuinely just not want to be around him. Also a distinct possibility there could be a personal component to this. But it would seem that, the calculation, like I said, it's less ideological and more of like a resistance to wanting to be embarrassed too bad.
I think that's clear. Just to finish this out, I want to return to your idea about the deepest fear of some of these far-right influencer types. I really do think that, especially when Biden looked weak and Trump just looked so powerful, he was brimming over with certainty he was going to win this thing by a landslide. He didn't have to moderate his rhetoric on this stuff at all. He was promising mass deportations. He was promising dictatorship for a day. He was saying all this stuff and he was going to win anyway. The far-right types really see that or saw that as their moment, right? And now I think...
Yeah.
Right? And now I think what's going on is, now that all of a sudden the black woman with the big woke crowds, right, is such a threat, all of a sudden maybe they're thinking to themselves, holy shit, we're going to lose our moment. This was our moment.
Well, they have to run a campaign now. They have to actually run a campaign.
If Trump loses, and that's it for Trump, I think. I don't think he's going to run in 2028, right? And again, I want to stress this thing is very close. Trump could win it, right? But now he's not winning. He's losing now. And I think for these far-right types, what they're looking at is the real possibility that the window of opportunity, their big moment, is going to pass them by, and the Trump era will be gone without the transformation that they want.
Right. And I also think, going back to the, sort of idea of Trump being a lot of these folks' meal ticket in terms of influence and popularity, when the Trump campaign was rocking and rolling and, I survived an assassination attempt and I threw my fist up in the air and, we're going to deport millions of people and not explain how we're going to do that supposedly non-violently.
With the military.
Yeah.
He said that.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, what happens when someone doesn't want to go? They don't like to talk about that.
They got thrown into the big detention camps that Stephen Miller is presiding over in his white coat.
Yeah. Bleak stuff.
Well, but the
point is, the point is that, if this was going to be the candor of the Trump campaign and the next 4 years, if they were just going to, let the proverbial hair down and let it rip, these folks had a pretty clear track into some real political influence, more than they've had so far even. And I don't think it looks like the cakewalk that it did. So like if you're in like a basketball game, right? So it's like down in the fourth quarter. If you're up by 20 points, your players might be trying to do crazy stuff like dunk it or alley-oops or whatever. But if the game looks like it's actually going to come down to a few points, you have to be a lot more strategic with how you think you're actually going to win this game. You have to start thinking about when you're going to call the timeouts. You have to start thinking about who's going to get the ball when. You're not going for the crazy stuff. And the people that have hitched their wagons to trying to cater to that crazy stuff more specifically, the people who are like, I'm the alley-oop announcer, I'm the slam dunk guy, might be a little bit worried that they might not really get to go back to that spot they thought they were going to have earlier in the game.
Well,
I part of my job is just abusing metaphors, so I had to get one.
Well, you did a killer job at that, man. No, in all seriousness, Jared Holt, this was a terrific discussion. Thanks so much for coming on with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Greg.
You've been listening to The Daily Blast with me, your host, Greg Sargent. The Daily Blast is a New Republic podcast and is produced by Riley Fessler and the DSR Network.